Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
It was so hot outside that even the air conditioner couldn't cope with it. Derek was lying on the huge bed in his room, wearing just shorts, and was dying of boredom. Yesterday, he and his friend Carlos had a great time at the local club. Derek couldn't even remember the name of the girl he brought back to his room from the club. He also couldn't recall how she left. After a wild night, his sleep was deep and heavy. Derek wasn't worried that the girl might have been a fraud. All his money was stored on a card he didn't have with him. Every day, a certain amount was transferred from that card to his special vacation card, which was very convenient and secure in terms of both scammers and excessive spending. Even if the girl wanted to steal his money, she would be extremely disappointed by the amount she'd see. In case he lost his vacation card or it got stolen, Derek always had a spare one kept with the hotel administrator. If the first card went missing, a call to the bank would activate the second backup card. He preferred not to bring expensive things with him on vacation, so he didn't worry about losses or theft. I wonder if Carlos has already woken up, Derek pondered. Carlos, too, didn't return alone from the club. Knowing his flirtatious nature, one could assume that the girl was probably still with him. Stop lounging around. Carlos burst into the room, startling Derek with his sudden appearance. Let's go somewhere already. Where? It's so hot outside that I'm afraid to leave the room, Derek replied with regret. The beach? We'll get roasted out there. Well, we won't go directly to the beach, but to a cafe. Carlos remained undeterred. Let's have some cold beer and shrimp. Derek mentally scolded himself for not coming up with that idea earlier. Indeed, the beachfront cafes were designed in a way that they remained cool even in the midday heat. Within a minute, the two friends headed towards the beach. Let's play a prank on the waitress. Carlos suggested his favorite game. He was tall, with an athletic build and naturally tan skin that became even darker with his tan. People often mistook him for a Spaniard, Italian, or Turkish, and he shamelessly used this to his advantage when approaching girls. His knowledge of Spanish, Italian, and English languages played a significant role in this. Carlos's favorite game was to pretend to be one of those foreign nationalities at a restaurant and speak to the staff in one of those languages, then observe the reactions and attempts of the waiters to please the customer. Derek wasn't too fond of Carlos's antics. When the game went too far, he would say that he was a translator and would place Carlos's orders with the waiters or even order something entirely unrelated to what Carlos said. Nevertheless, he reluctantly agreed to join the game. They chose the least crowded cafe and settled at one of the available tables. Soon, a waitress approached them. She couldn't have been more than 15 years old, petite, slim, with curly reddish hair standing out from her hairstyle. She had huge eyes and a very serious expression. Derek admired the girl and completely forgot about the agreement with his friend. However, Carlos remembered their deal. Leaning back slightly in his wicker chair, he gave the girl an appreciative look from head to toe and in a low, soft voice, like a true macho, asked in Italian, "How does the young signorina's mother allow her to work in such a place?" "We have a very respectable establishment, and a young lady of 20 is not prohibited from working here if she's independent from her parents," the waitress replied. "What will you order?" Carlos, who was always so quick-witted, couldn't utter a word in surprise. Derek decided to come to the rescue. "Excuse my friend." Carlos decided not to pretend to be a foreigner anymore and spoke in their native language. "Forgive me. May I know your name?" "My name is Nicole." The girl looked at him seriously, but seeing Carlos's apologetic expression, she thawed and smiled. The smile turned out to be incredibly charming and sweet, and Carlos felt himself falling for her. The friends stayed at the cafe until closing time, sipping their beers and observing Nicole. "I thought no woman could ever surprise me again, but apparently, I was wrong," Carlos said. "What's so surprising about it? Can't a woman learn Italian?" Derek wasn't as surprised. She can. But as far as I know, they don't teach Italian in local schools. What if she's not a local? Or maybe she studies at a college with Italian language courses?
Yeah,
Maybe, Carlos replied thoughtfully, still watching Nicole. That evening, the friends didn't head to a nightclub, instead, they returned to their rooms. Early in the morning, Derek was awakened by Carlos' joyful shout, "Wake up! Great things await us." "And what are they?" grumbled Derek, pulling the blanket over his head. "I've finally decided on the goal of my vacation. In my opinion, your goal was clear from the beginning, to drink alcohol and flirt with girls. Well, occasionally lying on the beach and swimming in the sea, all with the same purposes." Derek tried to hold on to the blanket, which Carlos was pulling off him. "No. That wasn't the goal. That's how I spend my time. But my goal is to conquer Nicole." "Nicole?" Derek abruptly sat up in bed. For some reason, Carlos' words made him uneasy. He blurted out rudely, "Do you want to have a holiday romance with her and then just leave her?" "Well, in a nutshell, you could say that," Carlos cheerfully replied, seemingly not noticing his friend's rudeness. "But what a thrill it will be. She's a hard nut to crack. I want to woo her. And what a victory it will be. Memories will last until the next vacation." Suddenly, Derek felt disgusted by his friend's words. He got up from the bed and silently went to take a shower. Standing under the water, Derek started to think. Nicole wasn't like the girls they easily met at local beaches and clubs. You could tell that she wasn't frivolous. Her knowledge of Italian and her serious gaze indicated that she was a smart and decent person. She won't pay attention to his advances, Derek thought hopefully, and if she falls for it, then she must have wanted it herself. I was wrong about her. However, if Carlos tries to force her into a relationship, I'll step in to defend her. With these thoughts, Derek stepped out of the shower. Carlos was sitting in the armchair, drumming his fingers impatiently on the armrests. "Are you ready? Come on, let's go faster." Carlos jumped up and rushed to the door. "Where are you rushing?" Derek got dressed on the go and followed him. "Where?" "To that cafe. And we can have breakfast there too." The cafe was empty. Not surprising, it was only 7:30 on the clock and potential customers were still asleep after a wild night. A waitress approached them. It wasn't Nicole. Carlos was greatly disappointed. "Could you call Nicole, please?" he asked the girl. "We got used to her after yesterday's visit." The waitress shrugged and walked away. A couple of minutes later, Nicole approached them. "What would you like to order?" she asked with a teasing smile but in a gentle tone. "Feed us, oh, beautiful Nicole," Carlos said, taking her hand and giving her a pleading look. Nicole gently freed her hand from his grasp and, now with a serious expression, offered them breakfast options. After taking their order, she left. "Promising start," Derek teased. "Well, this is just the beginning," Carlos replied, still smiling. While they were eating, the cafe gradually filled with customers. Communicating with Nicole seemed impossible, so Carlos finally decided to go to the sea, swim, and sunbathe. The men took some beer and snacks with them and headed to the beach. There, Carlos forgot about his initial goal and flirted with girls, seemingly completely forgetting about Nicole. To his surprise, Derek found himself glad about it, and he, too, got involved in meeting and chatting with women, forgetting that he wanted to protect Nicole from Carlos' persistent advances. Back at the cafe, it was crowded. Derek and Carlos struggled to find an available table. A waitress approached them. It wasn't Nicole. "Excuse me, could you please call Nicole?" "We got so used to her," Carlos said, flashing a wide smile at the girl. "Nicole has already left. She was working the morning shift today. Would you like to order something?" The waitress repeated Carlos' smile. "No, thank you." Carlos abruptly stood up and headed for the exit of the cafe. Derek followed him, surprised. Carlos, you're being rude. Derek reprimanded his friend. Well, what's there for us to do if Nicole isn't here? Carlos disdainfully shrugged. Let's go to the hotel restaurant for dinner or to the club. Let's have a real party. Do you think Nicole goes to clubs? Derek didn't get a chance to answer. Carlos continued, not listening to his friend and answering his own question. Of course, she does. She's a young, beautiful girl. Why would she stay home after work? She'll definitely go out with her friends to have some fun. After dinner at the hotel restaurant, the friends went to their respective rooms to shower and change. They then met again in the hotel lobby. Carlos had set a goal to find Nicole by visiting all the local clubs and discotheques. Somewhere closer to the early morning, Derek got tired of constantly changing locations. Carlos, let's go to bed. We won't find her anymore anyway. Weakling. The night is still young. Sorry, but I want to go home. Derek decisively stood up from the bar counter of the club they were currently in. You can do as you please, but I'm heading back to the hotel. Go if you want, I'll stay at this party. Carlos noticed how one of the dancing girls glanced at him and made inviting gestures. He decided that this evening shouldn't go to waste. If he couldn't find the girl he initially wanted to spend time with, he would replace her with someone else. Derek called a taxi and went back to the hotel. He woke up to bright sunlight shining right into his eyes. When he left the room yesterday, it was still light outside. He had returned from the club at dawn, so he didn't bother turning on the lights. The curtains remained drawn. Reluctantly, Derek got up, took a shower, got dressed, and feeling hungry, decided to have breakfast. Approaching Carlos' room door, he heard female sighs. Derek realized that his friend was not in the mood for food at the moment, turned around, and headed to the restaurant. Appetite comes with eating. The nightclub marathon and the lack of dinner led to a hearty, abundant breakfast. To work off the calories, a stroll was needed, so Derek decided to go for a walk. He walked slowly along the sea coast. His thoughts were far from this place. He was thinking about what he would need to do first when he returned from the vacation. A plan for a new project was forming in his mind. Lost in thought, he didn't notice how he had wandered quite far from the crowded beach. The shore was completely deserted. Perhaps, engrossed in his thoughts, he walked along the coastline beyond the city limits. Derek decided to turn back when he suddenly saw a solitary figure sitting by the sea. Some sixth sense directed his legs towards her. As he got closer, he noticed that it was a girl. She was sitting with her legs stretched out into the sea, as if talking to herself. Intrigued, Derek approached the girl, getting within arm's reach. The girl, noticing his shadow, looked up, and to his surprise, he recognized Nicole. It seemed like she recognized him too. She raised her hands to her head and then let them drop. In her palms were headphones that he hadn't noticed before. Hello, Derek said, slightly belatedly. Hello, Nicole replied calmly, but with an unspoken question in her eyes. Why are you here? Why are you alone? Derek forgot about their initial acquaintance after the unexpected encounter and didn't know what to say in this situation. I always come here to work out. I do it alone so that no one disturbs me, Nicole simply replied. Work out? Derek was even more surprised. But it's supposed to be vacation time, right? Well, I'm not a student. I exercise for myself, Nicole smiled openly. Derek sat down next to her. His mind was filled with numerous questions, but he didn't know how to ask them. Nicole remained silent too. Finally, unable to come up with anything to ask, Derek suggested, "Shall we go for a swim?" "Let's go." Nicole agreed. They swam at a short distance from each other and continued to remain silent. Derek decided to break the ice. As they returned to the shore, he skimmed his hand along the water's surface, causing splashes to hit Nicole. She didn't hesitate to retaliate and splashed him back. The tension between them dissipated, and they began to play in the water like children. Splashing each other, chasing, diving, seeing who could stay underwater the longest. After one of those dives, Nicole resurfaced and didn't see Derek. She carefully scanned the sea's surface and then called out to him, but with no response. Worried, she headed to the spot where she had last seen Derek. As she swam closer, she dove, trying to see something in the sea water. Nothing. She dove again. Still nothing. Feeling desperate, she dove once more, trying to stay underwater as long as possible to examine more of the area. When she ran out of air in her lungs, she resurfaced, intending to seek help from the lifeguards. Wiping the clinging hair from her face and wiping her face with her palms, she turned towards the shore and bumped into Derek. He was standing there, seemingly unaffected, with a broad smile. Nicole became angry. "Have you gone mad? You heartless person. What kind of stupid joke is this?" To give weight to her anger, she began to hit his chest with her fists. Derek burst into laughter. The more he laughed, the more furious Nicole became. She shouted at him and continued to pummel him with her fists. But when tears appeared in her eyes, Derek got scared. He caught her raised fists, gently brought her hands behind her back, pulled her close, and kissed her. He kissed her for a long time, until she stopped struggling and relaxed. Then he released her hands but didn't stop embracing and kissing her. They kissed until both of them realized they had to either stop or go further. Nicole stepped back and headed towards the shore. Derek followed her. On the shore, Nicole took a towel to dry her hair. "Nicole, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you," Derek said apologetically. Okay, Nicole began getting dressed. Derek didn't want to part with her. "Can I invite you to lunch?" he asked hopefully. Seeing Nicole hesitating, he took her hand and pleaded, "Nicole, please, let me make it up to you." "All right, let's go," Nicole agreed. Derek picked up her beach bag, and they headed towards the town. To break the prolonged silence, Derek decided to ask the question that had been bothering him since morning. "Nicole, if you don't mind me asking, what were you doing when I approached you?" "I was studying Arabic," she replied. "Arabic?" "Yes. I've always enjoyed learning foreign languages since I was a child. I teach myself because I can't afford language courses. Nowadays, you can find plenty of language resources online, and they are entirely free. Recently, I was studying Italian. I'm not very good at it yet, but I try to learn something every day. Right now, I'm interested in Arabic." "Wow," Derek whistled. "You're a true polyglot. I'm sorry for the personal question, but what about your family? Seeing your talents, don't they want to help you?" "I only have my mom in my family. My father left us when I was born. My grandmother passed away before my birth. My grandfather went to a retirement home, leaving us with a small house where we live now. After my father left, my mom started having health problems. She can barely move around the house. All the care for our little family falls on me. I don't have an education, so I could only get a job as a waitress. I also do some freelance translation work online, but the income is not high. Clients prefer certified translators." Derek listened and admired this young, brave girl. She spoke about her life so simply, as if she were talking about a completely unrelated person. They arrived at a small, cozy restaurant. The lunch crowd had subsided, and there were plenty of free tables in the dining area. They chose a table by a large window with a view of the sea. After placing their orders, they continued their conversation. Derek shared that he works in a small construction company with his friend Carlos, and they came here for a vacation and planned to stay for a couple more weeks. At that moment, Carlos quickly entered the restaurant with a huge bouquet of flowers and headed straight to them. For the first time, upon seeing his friend, Derek wasn't thrilled about his presence. Unlike Derek, Carlos was beaming with happiness. "I'm so glad I found you. I woke up late today and couldn't find you. I thought you either went to the beach or to the cafe with Nicole," he addressed Derek. "How did you find us?" Nicole asked. "Your colleagues told me that you like to relax on the far beach outside the town. So, I headed there. And on the way, I spotted you through this window. With Derek, I don't need to ask, he's my friend, and he's always happy to see me, just like I am. Nicole, do you mind if I join you? Of course. Nicole cheerfully replied, shifting all her attention to Carlos. Carlos was particularly lively. He made many jokes, showered her with compliments, and lavished her with attention. When they left the restaurant, Carlos invited Nicole to a club in the evening. Thanks, but no, Nicole replied to his invitation. I don't like noisy places. Besides, I prefer spending evenings at home with my mom. Nicole, you're the most extraordinary girl I've ever met. Carlos exclaimed. Refusing a fun time. But I won't give up that easily. Maybe we can just take a walk in the evening? Only for a short while, Nicole reluctantly agreed. That's perfect. Where should I come to pick you up? Nicole gave him the address. In the evening, Carlos dropped by Derek's place. How do I look? Like a decent man, who only has theaters and exhibitions on his mind, Derek joked, but he felt a tinge of sadness. He assumed that their kiss with Nicole would take their relationship to a new level and she would choose him. But apparently, the kiss didn't mean anything to her. Carlos didn't notice the sadness in his friend's joke and replied seriously, you won't believe it, but I want to make a good impression on a girl for the first time. You'll succeed. Derek encouraged him. Well, what are your plans? Carlos asked. I'll go down to the hotel bar and invite some not-so-unusual girl, unlike Nicole, for a cocktail. And then we'll see how it goes. Well, good luck to you. Carlos patted his shoulder and left. An hour later, Derek went down to the bar. Within a few minutes, he was in the company of two girls who chatted merrily with him and enjoyed their cocktails. Meanwhile, Carlos was strolling along the coast with Nicole. He was captivated. He wished this walk could last forever. He completely forgot why he used to go on dates with girls in the first place. He forgot about the existence of other women altogether. When Nicole said it was time for her to go home, Carlos felt disappointed. But when she suggested they could meet again, he regained his motivation. Seeing her off to her home, Carlos leisurely made his way back to his hotel. On the way, Derek called him and told him where he was. Derek, how about spending some time together in my room? Carlos didn't want to join the company where Derek was. I'll grab something real quick, and you say
Goodbye.
to your new acquaintances. Or,
Yeah.
no, it's fine. I don't feel like socializing with girls tonight either. Go to your room, I'll try to come as soon as possible. When Derek entered Carlos's room, he had already set the table. Carlos poured them each a shot. They drank and fell silent. What happened? Did Nicole reject you? Derek asked, looking at his friend's distant face, secretly hoping for a positive answer. No. The evening was wonderful. She's so incredible. Carlos struggled to find the right words. He poured another shot. You know, I think I'm in love. As Carlos said that, he downed the shot in one go. I think I'm in love, Derek replayed his friend's words in his mind. Carlos had never said such a thing about a girl before, but Derek found it hard to believe in his feelings. It seemed that Carlos wasn't capable of loving one woman. At least, not in the next few years. Sometimes, he wouldn't even remember the name of the girl he spent the night with. Meanwhile, when parting with Nicole, Carlos would already miss her and eagerly await their next meeting. And if before, he pursued only one goal on a date, now he simply wanted to hold her hand, listen to her voice, timidly hug and kiss her on the cheek as a farewell, feeling her tender, cool skin with his lips. Falling asleep, he would dream of her. On their third date, Carlos bought a small gold pendant adorned with gemstones that matched the color of her eyes. But Nicole flatly rejected the gift and even got angry. She didn't accept any other gifts either. Only flowers received her favor. Carlos systematically depleted the flower shops. Sometimes they would sit in a cafe, eating ice cream and drinking coffee. But most of the time, they walked along the coast or sat on the beach, simply watching the sea. "I apologize, my friend, for leaving you to yourself," Carlos told Derek apologetically. "But you understand. It's all right. At least you've started to resemble a normal, serious man, not a self-absorbed womanizer." Derek reassured his friend with a laugh, but somewhere deep inside, a sense of longing settled within him. When Nicole was at work, Derek would accompany Carlos to her cafe and observe how she smiled at him, how she looked at him. During those moments, Derek felt an overwhelming pain, and it made him want to howl. As their vacation neared its end, Carlos became increasingly gloomy with each passing day. Finally, he decided to share his feelings and seek advice from his friend. Nicole was at work. After having breakfast at her cafe, the friends laid on the beach and sipped beer. "Derek, what should I do? I can't bear to part with her. I don't want to." Carlos despairingly turned to his friend. "Well, what's the problem? Marry her, and you can take her with you," Derek suggested. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for that step." "Seriously?" Derek looked disapprovingly at Carlos. "May I ask a personal question? Was there something between you two?" "No," Carlos answered so calmly that Derek turned to face him again. It didn't sound like his friend. "Then maybe it's hard for you to let her go because you haven't completed what you had in mind? In other words, she's your forbidden fruit?" Derek probed. "I don't think so. No, of course, I want her and all, but that's not the main issue now." "What is the main issue?" "I want to be with her. Then I'll go back to the beginning of our conversation, marry her. Even if I'm ready for that, these things can't be done in a couple of days. So, are you ready or not?" Carlos remained silent. Derek took a sip of his beer and decided to propose a plan that would help Carlos make a decision and give Derek a chance as well. "Let's do this. You say your goodbyes now, promise to call and write to her, and we'll fly back home. If this plan works out, you won't have to worry anymore. But if your communication through messages and calls continues, then we'll start preparing for the wedding." "Thank you, my friend. I think that's the only way out right now." Carlos warmly thanked his friend and clinked their bottles together. On the last evening before their departure, they decided to spend it together. Nicole was working the first shift, so they planned to go to a restaurant right after her shift and celebrate their farewell. Surprisingly, the evening went smoothly and cheerfully. They joked and laughed together. Carlos expressed all his wishes, promises, and tenderness to Nicole during the dances, as he occasionally invited her to dance. Thanks to Derek's tactfulness, he didn't feel like a third wheel. Their time together felt like the interaction of old friends. Maybe it was due to his overwhelming emotions or the higher amount of alcohol Carlos consumed compared to Nicole and Derek, but Carlos got quite drunk. At first, he had difficulty speaking, his words slurred, and then his movements became uncontrollable. Nicole suggested ending the evening.
Yeah.
"Sure, whatever you say, Nicole," Carlos agreed, barely able to articulate. "I've had enough." "Let me take you to your room," Derek offered. But who will escort Nicole? Carlos, though heavily intoxicated, couldn't forget about caring for his beloved woman. "I'll take you first, and then I'll see Nicole off." "Thank you, buddy," Carlos said, delighted, and fell asleep. Derek asked Nicole to wait for him and then helped his friend back to his room, tucking him into bed. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant. "I'll call a taxi now," he said to the girl. "Let's take a walk instead. I need to get some fresh air so that my mom doesn't worry when I come home smelling like alcohol." "Let's do that," Derek agreed, not believing his luck. Nicole, the lovely girl, granted him a chance to spend more time with her. They walked slowly towards her home. It was late, and a cool breeze blew in from the sea. Without a jacket or anything other than a t-shirt and shorts, Derek finally gathered the courage to put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close to him. "I'm sorry, it's the only way I can keep you warm," he said, trying to convey regret in his voice. No problem. I'm the one who declined the taxi, remember? Thanks. Nicole replied and wrapped her arm around his waist. And so, they continued their walk. Nicole chattered about something, but Derek couldn't hear her. He was doing his best to restrain himself from doing something foolish that could forever ruin his friendship with Carlos, and separate him from Nicole. When they arrived at her house, Derek reluctantly removed his arm from Nicole's shoulder. She also pulled back, but then placed her hand on his chest and looked straight into his eyes. Everything that had been holding Derek back up until that moment crumbled. Exhaling her name, he enclosed her in his strong embrace and kissed her lips. Nicole, sweetheart, is that you? Yes, Mom, I'm coming. Don't worry. Nicole stepped back from Derek. Nicole, he began, I want to tell you. I'm sorry. I understand everything. I don't blame you for anything. It's all because of the alcohol, she interrupted him before he could finish. But He didn't get a chance to complete his sentence. Nicole had already disappeared into the house. Derek returned to the hotel almost on autopilot. All his thoughts were consumed by Nicole. He scolded himself for his indecisiveness, for being slow, for not taking the initiative from the very first kiss, for allowing his friend the opportunity to win her heart. Arriving at the hotel, he went to the bar with the intention of drinking to forget about Nicole and his feelings for her. The next morning, Derek woke up with a terrible headache. He began to recall the events of the previous evening, the farewell dinner with Carlos and Nicole, guiding the heavily drunk Carlos to his room, seeing Nicole off while embracing her by her shoulders, their kiss at her home. He remembered going to the hotel bar with the decision to drink. And he realized that alcohol didn't help. The door swung open with a crash, and a happy Carlos burst into the room. Derek. Why are you still asleep? We only have 3 hours left before the flight. I've ordered a taxi. We're heading to the airport in an hour and a half. Come on, get up. Carlos then looked at his friend with surprise and asked, Did you get drunk too yesterday? But with whom? Not with Nicole, right? No, I saw her off and then went to the bar for a cocktail before bed. I must have overdone it, Derek replied. Get up, go to the shower, and I'll try to pack your things in the meantime. Carlos said. Derek obediently left the room. He stood under the cool water for a long time, and it made him feel a bit better. Then it dawned on him, how could it be 3 hours before the flight? The flight was at 4 p.m. Carlos, are you sure you're not confused? Did we change our flight? Why are we leaving in 3 hours? Derek asked. Because it's already 1 p.m. You slept for a long time. Carlos laughed. I've already said goodbye to Nicole. We agreed that she'll come visit me in the fall. That's great, Derek said apathetically. Suddenly, everything around him became indifferent. Carlos noticed this in his own way. Listen, buddy, let's go eat. You probably got food poisoning yesterday. We need to replenish your strength. Carlos suggested. They quickly got ready, went down to the reception to return the keys and collect their valuables from the safe, and headed to the restaurant. After eating, Derek really felt better. An hour later, at the airport, he no longer felt any nausea or weakness. What are you planning to do this weekend? Carlos popped into Derek's office. I don't know yet. I was thinking of visiting my parents. Kate is celebrating her birthday in their garden. It's beautiful there now, no need for restaurants. Kate was Derek's younger sister. In their childhood, they couldn't stand each other, but as they grew up, they became best friends and tried to see each other as often as possible. Great. As your best friend, can I join too? I want to admire the countryside autumn. Carlos asked. Are you serious about wanting to admire? Derek couldn't believe his ears. Usually, it was impossible to lure Carlos out of the city, especially to admire nature. He preferred spending weekends in nightclubs or at parties. Well, why not? It's time to grow up and get serious. You know, I realize that happiness isn't found in parties. I want to settle down and start a family, Carlos explained. Derek couldn't believe what he was hearing. He knew Carlos spent long hours every evening on the phone with Nicole, but he never imagined things had progressed this far. Are you saying? Derek began. Yes. Nicole is coming in a couple of weeks. I've already bought the ring, I'm going to propose to her, Carlos revealed. And she? Are you sure she wants the same as you? Derek's heart literally stopped in anticipation of the answer. Yes. We've already discussed everything. I hinted at my intentions, and she hinted back that she's not opposed to it. And there it was. Derek's last fleeting hope evaporated. It's my own fault, he scolded himself. I shouldn't have hesitated. You seem a bit sad, bro, Kate approached Derek. Did something happen? Everything's fine, I'm just thinking about how time flies. When was the last time we engaged in military operations, so that our parents didn't know which corners to separate us to prevent us from killing each other? And now, the only time I'd want to kill you is when you don't answer my calls. Kate burst out laughing. You won't believe it, but me too, she said. Guys. The new batch of meat is ready. Everyone, come to the table. Derek and Kate's father called. Carlos, weren't you not a fan of family gatherings with the older generation before? Derek's mom asked, a question that had been bothering her since her son arrived with his friend. The two guys had been friends since childhood. They sat together at the same desk in school and then enrolled in the same university and the same faculty. But unlike Derek, Carlos had always been fond of having fun, going out for entertainment, and partying. And now, instead of going to a nightclub, he came to the countryside to relax in nature. Derek's mother loved Carlos like her own son, but, knowing his character well, she was surprised by this change in preferences. Everything changed, and well, I've decided to get married. Carlos replied. Derek's mother gasped in surprise, and even Derek's father was taken aback. All the guests rushed to Carlos, bombarding him with questions. Only Kate didn't take her eyes off her brother. He stood there looking grim and lost. I see you're not too thrilled about your friend's upcoming wedding? Kate silently approached her brother. Why would you think that? I'm happy that he's finally becoming more serious, Derek looked at his sister, trying to appear nonchalant. Well, she snorted, that's why you have that look on your face. Are you afraid that a more settled Carlos will forget about you? Or is it something about his future wife? You know her, right? What's wrong with her? Derek remained silent for a long time, staring at his sneakers. Kate patiently waited. I realized too late that I fell in love. He confessed and told his sister everything about Nicole, from the beginning to their last kiss. Something tells me she's not indifferent to you either, Kate remarked after her brother finished pouring his heart out. But she's marrying Carlos. Well, that's because you've been hesitating for too long. When is she coming? Carlos said in a couple of weeks. Exactly. So stop hesitating. It's time to act. But what can I do now? Talk to her. Tell her about your feelings. Let her know that you're willing to fight for her if needed. I'll end up betraying my friend. You won't know unless you try. You should talk to her first. And if it's mutual between you, then you can tell Carlos everything. As your best friend, he should understand you. Kate advised. What should I understand? They didn't notice Carlos approaching them. Well, if you eavesdropped on us, then you probably know what you should understand. Kate exclaimed with indignation, hoping that the saying, the best defense is a good offense, would cool Carlos's anger if he had overheard the entire conversation and understood its subject. I didn't eavesdrop on you. Carlos started to defend himself. I heard that I have to do something as Derek's best friend. Am I still his best friend, or does he have other best friends? I have to understand something there. We just decided to go fishing with an overnight stay tomorrow. And Derek really wants you to come with us. Kate came up with an excuse. But tomorrow is Sunday. And on Monday, I have to work. Carlos said, puzzled. Yes, that's why Derek wanted to ask you if you could extend your weekend by one day. When else will we all gather like this in nature? Kate improvised. Well, what? Fishing is a great idea. I'm in. I'll even call my boss tomorrow and personally ask for the day off. Carlos agreed. That's great. Kate subtly winked at her brother and headed back to the house. And now let's go to sleep. It's late already. Where are you staying, Nicole? Kate decided to find out if her brother had a chance to meet with Nicole. I booked a hotel room for her near my house, Carlos replied on behalf of Nicole. They were all sitting at the restaurant, celebrating Nicole's arrival. Carlos was beaming with happiness, anticipating the time he would spend with the object of his affection. He hoped that by the end of her stay, they would set a wedding date. And judging by the looks Nicole was giving him, that decision wouldn't take long. Derek couldn't find his place. He couldn't manage to have a private conversation with Nicole. She was always in the company of Carlos, who never left her side for a moment. Even when Derek decided to take a day off work to meet with Nicole, he found out that Carlos had taken a few days off precisely during her visit. They met several times as a trio, going to the movies or cafes. With each encounter, Derek felt more like an outsider. Nicole only had eyes for Carlos and hardly spoke to Derek. A couple of times, when Carlos was away for a few minutes, Derek tried to strike up a conversation, but she always cut him off with some insignificant question. In those moments, her eyes seemed to say, forget it. Nothing happened, and there can't be anything. On the evening before her departure, a happy Carlos rushed to Derek's place. He had a bottle of brandy and a bag of groceries in his hands. Derek. We have a celebration, he shouted throughout the apartment. Why aren't you with Nicole? She's leaving tomorrow. I thought you'd spend this evening together, Derek's hope rekindled. Not just this evening, but a whole lifetime. She said a yes, to me. Tomorrow, we're flying together. I'm going to her family. Carlos couldn't calm down, overwhelmed with happiness. She decided to turn in early tonight. I saw her to the hotel, but I can't calm down and believe my luck. Will you share my joy? Of course, buddy. I'm happy for you. Everything will be great. Come in. Derek tried to push all his feelings for Nicole out of his mind and genuinely be happy for his friend. Well, she chose someone else. There's nothing he can do about it now. He needs to wish them happiness and forget the girl who isn't meant for him. Derek headed to the airport to welcome Carlos, Nicole, and her mother. Carlos's courtship went smoothly, and without wasting any time, he began preparing for the wedding. The preparations started with him giving Nicole his credit card and full consent for any of her whims and wishes regarding their wedding arrangements. By the time they returned from Nicole's homeland, she had already developed a complete plan of action. Kate volunteered to help her. From morning till night, the girls were busy meeting with restaurant owners, selecting hosts, designers, and trying on dresses. Carlos was assigned not to interfere with the wedding preparations, which he gladly followed by immersing himself in work. He had to catch up on the tasks that piled up during his absence and prepare new projects so that nothing would distract him during the honeymoon. Derek also immersed himself in his work. He needed some distraction from his gloomy thoughts. In the end, from morning till late evening, the friends disappeared in their work. For the significant amount of completed work and as a wedding gift, Carlos's superiors granted him 3 additional days off, in addition to his 2-week vacation, to prepare for the celebration. Derek, I wouldn't want to have a traditional bachelor party. Carlos peeked into Derek's office on the last workday before their break. Oh. How do you want to spend your last days of bachelorhood then? Derek looked interested. To be honest, I'd like all of us together, you, me, Nicole, her mother, Kate, my parents, to go to the countryside, to your parents' place. We could relax like last time in nature, grill some shashlik, take a walk in the garden. Could you talk to them about it? We'll only stay for one night. We'll leave tomorrow morning and be back in the city the day after, Carlos explained. Of course, I'll talk to them. I think they won't mind. Derek assured. Thank you, Derek. You're a true friend. Carlos exclaimed and then disappeared through the door. Derek stared at the closed door for a long time, contemplating what he would tell Carlos if he ever found out about his feelings towards his future wife. Then he picked up the phone. The female part of the company was busy preparing salads, while the male part, sipping brandy, was grilling shashlik. The weather, for the end of autumn, was simply magnificent. The sun was shining brightly, and some of the trees still had golden and red leaves that hadn't fallen yet. Nature seemed to be giving a gift to the future newlyweds. Derek tried his best to look content with life and the company gathered. However, he felt heavy-hearted and sad. From time to time, he glanced at Nicole, admiring her smile, tender blush, and her deep, endless eyes. Sometimes, their eyes met, but she only smiled carelessly in response to his silent question, "Do you really want this?" Nevertheless, Derek managed to distract himself from his melancholic thoughts. The rest of the evening passed rather well. With the arrival of darkness, everyone moved inside the house and gradually dispersed to their assigned rooms to go to sleep. Carlos shared a room with Derek. They chatted a bit on unrelated topics, and Carlos fell asleep like a happy, healthy man. Derek couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, unable to find a comfortable position to invite sleep. Finally, feeling hopeless, Derek got out of bed, got dressed, and left the house. He decided to take a stroll to the river, hoping that the leisurely, peaceful walk would help induce sleep. As he stepped out of the house and paused on the porch, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. "You can't sleep either?" Derek flinched in surprise. Stepping closer, he saw Nicole, who was previously hidden in the shadows of the bushes near the porch. "I decided to take a walk. What about you?" "Can't sleep either," she asked. "Yes. There's a restlessness in my heart," Derek replied. "Are you anxious or afraid of something?" she inquired. "I'm not afraid," he felt, rather than saw, her smile, "I'm just worried. Everything is happening so quickly." They slowly walked along the street, and when they reached the river, without saying a word, they headed towards the gazebo thoughtfully arranged by someone on the bank. They both sat down on a bench. Derek decided to break the silence with a question that had been troubling him for a long time. "Nicole, do you really want this?" he asked. "Why this question?" She turned towards him, and they found themselves face to face. As soon as he looked into her eyes, the surrounding world disappeared, leaving only the two of them. Derek cupped her face in his hands and gently kissed her. Again and again, he kissed her, feeling no resistance from her. He held her close, kissing her more passionately. She let out a soft moan and wrapped her arms around his neck. All the barriers that held him back before crumbled. Gradually, reality returned. The night's autumn chill started to be felt in their bodies. Derek held Nicole even tighter to himself, not wanting to let her go. But suddenly, she pulled away and began to put back on the clothing she had removed earlier. "Nicole." Derek tried to embrace her again. "Wait. I'll fix everything. We'll be together, no matter the cost." "It's too late. Forget it." Nothing happened, she said, disappearing into the darkness of the night. The house was quiet. Derek walked into his room and lay down. He couldn't fall asleep. It felt like he had died and been buried, with a heavy granite slab placed on top. Today, his last hope of being with Nicole had died. And he had died with her. Derek woke up in complete silence, just like when he fell asleep. He sat up in bed and looked around. The couch where Carlos had slept was neatly arranged and gave no hint that someone had spent the night on it. Derek left his room and went downstairs to the living room. There, he saw his mom sitting in a chair, knitting. His dad was not around. When his mom heard his footsteps, she looked up. "Derek, you're awake. Will you have breakfast?" "I'll heat everything up," she said, setting aside her knitting and heading to the kitchen. "Yes. Where is everyone?" Derek asked. "Dad went to tidy up the garden. We need to put away the furniture, the grill. I guess we won't be able to have another gathering in the countryside this year. And Carlos and his family left in the morning, they didn't want to wake you. You'll see them tomorrow." "Morning? What time is it?" "It's almost 3 p.m. You, Derek, don't go anywhere today. We'll go together tomorrow. Today, just spend time with us and tell us how you're doing. We barely have time to talk because of all these celebrations." "Okay, Mom." In the evening, his dad lit up the fireplace. Sitting next to his parents, Derek drank tea and enjoyed his mom's homemade pie. He wished this evening would never end, and that all his feelings and emotions about Nicole would turn out to be just a pleasant dream. "Honestly, I thought you would be the first to settle down with a family. But Carlos is still elusive," his mom smiled. "Carlos is such a restless person. But his bride is a wonderful girl." "She's amazing," Derek said out loud, not realizing he had spoken his thoughts. His mother looked at him with concern, but Derek quickly composed himself, giving her a carefree smile, and took a sip of tea. The wedding turned out to be very joyful and somehow homey, despite being celebrated in the best restaurant in town. Guests were genuinely happy and wholeheartedly congratulated the newlyweds. The bride looked divine. Even in the groom, one could no longer recognize the carefree guy he was just a couple of months ago. They decided to spend their honeymoon in Nicole's hometown. Carlos booked a hotel room near her home so that she could visit her mom frequently. But they needed to resolve the issue of her care. Carlos insisted on having her move in with him and offered to take her mom along. However, her mom adamantly refused to move to another city. The newlyweds hoped to solve this problem during their vacation. Derek started working harder. He stayed late at the office more often, accepted any business trips, and practically stopped coming home. When his superiors offered him a promotion to head a branch in another city, he readily accepted. By the time Carlos and Nicole returned from their vacation, Derek had already moved. For the first time in their lives, the friends celebrated Christmas separately. Derek arrived at his parents' place closer to midnight. As usual lately, he got caught up at work and missed the daytime flight. Carlos and Nicole were celebrating the holiday at his parents' house. In the morning, Nicole felt so unwell that she couldn't get out of bed. Attributing it to alcohol and excessive feasting, she decided to rest. Letting Carlos continue the celebrations, she stayed in bed and watched TV. The next day, she didn't feel any better. Carlos suggested returning home, and they did just that. Carlos wanted to keep celebrating the holiday, hoping that it would be better at their home than at his parents'. Since Nicole fell ill, Carlos couldn't go clubbing, but with her permission, he started inviting friends over. Sometimes the parties went on until morning. At first, Nicole was understanding about her husband's entertainment, but later she asked him to stop hosting parties at home. Carlos promised that as soon as the holidays were over, he would stop having celebrations. Nicole decided to wait. However, she didn't participate in the parties. Carlos didn't like her request. He wasn't used to listening to anyone other than close relatives if it restricted him in any way. After he got Nicole, he realized that he was becoming less interested in her. While she was unattainable, he desired her and was ready to do anything to possess her. But now the chase was over, and the prey was caught. No, he still wanted her. He enjoyed being with her, sleeping with her. He liked that she lived in his house. But he no longer wanted to put up with restrictions for her. Nicole was still feeling unwell. Barely waiting for the end of the holidays, she made an appointment with a doctor. Carlos was at work that day, and Nicole decided to go alone without telling him anything. "I'll tell him if it's something serious, but if not, there's no need to worry him unnecessarily," she thought on her way to the clinic. "Congratulations. You're 10 weeks pregnant," the doctor said with a smile, looking at Nicole. 10 weeks pregnant, she didn't understand. Pregnant, he confirmed. Nicole decided to stop at the nearest cafe next to the clinic to contemplate her situation. Ordering a cup of tea and a pastry, she took out her phone and opened the calendar. If the doctor was correct about the timing, the baby could be either Derek's or Carlos's. She hoped it was Carlos's. After all, she had only been intimate with Derek once. But what should she do now? Nicole typed in the search engine, "Can you determine the father of a baby during pregnancy?" The all-knowing internet provided millions of answers. Nicole read some of them and felt somewhat reassured. In the same way, she searched for a clinic where this could be done. She managed to find one in her city. However, the price for this test turned out to be significantly high. Nicole didn't have such a sum of money. Of course, Carlos could give her as much money as she asked for, but she didn't want to take money from her husband for this. The result could potentially not be in his favor. And if that happened, she had already made her decision: Carlos would not raise another man's child. She had to take responsibility for her mistakes. According to the clinic's website, the analysis could be done starting from the 18th week of pregnancy. Before that date, Nicole had to find the money for it. She already had a little idea of how to do it. During dinner that evening, she turned to her husband. "Carlos, I would like to get a job. Maybe your company needs a translator. You know, I don't have formal education, but that means I could be paid less." "You're not satisfied with the money I give you?" he asked rudely, not taking his eyes off the tablet where he was watching a video from his favorite blogger. "I just want to contribute something to our family myself. I can't be buying you gifts with your own money, can I?" "Fine, I'll talk to the management," Carlos replied reluctantly. He had no intention of talking to anyone. He liked having Nicole always at home, depending on him, and turning a blind eye to his small flaws. Since his best friend moved to another city, Carlos had made many new acquaintances he would never have interacted with if Derek were still around. These people had a frivolous and wild lifestyle. But with Derek gone, there was no one to stop Carlos from making thoughtless decisions, and he started going to clubs and parties more frequently, sometimes even forgetting to inform his wife. Throughout the following week, Nicole asked her husband daily if he had talked to the management. Carlos brushed her off and claimed he didn't have time. Then she mustered up the courage, wrote a detailed resume describing all her knowledge and experience, and sent it to the human resources department of the company where Carlos worked. To her surprise, they contacted her the next day. A friendly girl on the phone informed her that her resume had caught the company's attention, and she was invited for an interview. Nicole was ecstatic. She spent a long time choosing a suit, meticulously styling her hair, and applying makeup. With all the necessary documents in hand, she was fully prepared for the interview. Nicole didn't say anything to Carlos. She decided that if she were accepted for the job, she would prepare a celebratory dinner and shared the news over dinner. She hoped her husband would be happy for her. And if she wasn't hired, then there would be nothing to talk about. The gray-haired man in an expensive suit with golden watches on his wrist looked astonished at the girl sitting in front of him. "Did you really learn all these languages on your own?" "Yes, I try to study a lot and, whenever possible, communicate with native speakers." "Remarkable," the man said thoughtfully. With sadness, he thought that his own children, who might even be older than this girl, could barely speak without using coarse language and slang in their native language. "Well, let's sum up our conversation," he continued. "I can't hire you as a regular employee, as much as I'd like to. You understand, even if my colleagues don't mind having an employee without a diploma, our partners, clients, and especially competitors won't understand." Tears welled up in Nicole's eyes. She struggled to hold back from crying. "But I'd be delighted to have you as a freelancer," the man continued, not noticing the candidate's emotional state. "There are advantages to it," he noted, finally noticing Nicole's sad look. "You won't be required to visit the office. You can work from home, and we'll send your remuneration to your bank card." "Thank you," Nicole mumbled, hardly believing her luck. "Agreed." Now go to the HR department and provide them with your details for processing. Ecstatic, Nicole rushed home to prepare dinner and shared the good news with Carlos. She was sure he would be happy for her, despite his initial discontent. Nicole stared at the flickering candle without blinking. It was 3 a.m. She sat at the dinner table, which had never been set. The long-awaited dinner never happened. Carlos never came home from work. His phone was not answering. Nicole had called until midnight, then she stopped. She thought that if something had happened, she would have been informed by now. And now, she just sat there, looking at the flame. Her mind was blank. The sound of the front door opening came from the hallway. Carlos staggered into the apartment. Struggling to close the door behind him, he headed for the bedroom. Passing by the kitchen, he noticed Nicole sitting there. She didn't move. He stopped, thought about something, and approached her. "What are you doing here?" he asked disapprovingly, scanning the table with his eyes. "Nothing, just sitting," Nicole replied emotionlessly. "And what's this?" He pointed to the set table. "Dinner," she replied in the same tone. "I see," Carlos said, smirking, and then snorted as he left the kitchen. Nicole sat until dawn. When the candles burned out, she got up from the chair and began to clear the table. She threw the uneaten food into the trash bin, washed and put away the dishes. Then she went to the guest room, locked herself in, and lay down to sleep without changing her clothes. Carlos woke up with a strong headache. He took a shower and got dressed with difficulty. Only then did he notice that he was alone in bed. Nicole was not there. He became anxious. Leaving the bedroom, he walked through the entire apartment and found that the door to the guest room was locked from the inside, which reassured him slightly. He went to the kitchen to make himself some coffee. While the coffee was brewing, he glanced at the table. Everything was cleared away, only candle holders with the remains of the candles stood lonely on the white tablecloth. Carlos checked the refrigerator, hoping to find yesterday's dinner, but it was not there. Something prompted him to look in the trash bin. He felt intense shame for Nicole. He had seen her missed calls but hadn't bothered to call her back to say he was running late. And she was waiting for him, preparing a special dinner. Maybe she wanted to share something special with him. Carlos let out a heavy sigh, took out the trash bag with the uneaten dinner, tied it up, and left for work, deciding to dispose of it along the way. An hour after her husband's departure, Nicole woke up. She felt sad and hurt. She took a shower and grabbed the laptop from their bedroom with Carlos. Nicole headed to the kitchen, intending to have some coffee and, if possible, breakfast. She still felt nauseous in the mornings. But now she knew the reason for these discomforts. She had just over a month to save up money and find out who the father of her baby was. She decided to learn more about the procedure she was about to undergo. Loading a web page on the internet, Nicole noticed that she had received several emails. Among the promotional messages, she found an email from Carlos's company. Opening it with excitement, she found a file with documents that needed translation. Forgetting about her coffee, Nicole immersed herself in work. A persistent doorbell interrupted her focused state. Nicole looked at the clock, it was already 2 p.m. Her stomach confirmed that it was lunchtime, and it hadn't even had breakfast. With some effort, she got up from the chair. Her muscles had stiffened and weren't listening to her after being in the same position for so long. Trying to move faster, she approached the front door and quickly opened it. A courier stood there with a huge bouquet of flowers. "Sign here," he said, trying to hide his annoyance at the long wait. Nicole signed the form and, apologizing and thanking the courier, accepted the bouquet. Back in the kitchen, as she placed the flowers in a vase, she noticed a card inside. She took it out, read it, and smiled. The bouquet was from Carlos. In the card, he apologized sincerely for his behavior and asked her to be ready by 7 p.m. for a restaurant outing. All the tiredness and bad mood disappeared from Nicole. She rushed to pick out an outfit for the evening. Once everything was ready, she returned to the kitchen, prepared herself some lunch, quickly ate, and resumed her work. By 6 p.m., the translation was completed. Nicole double-checked everything and sent the finished file with the documents to her employer. At 7 in the evening, she was already prepared for the restaurant outing. Her phone rang, and it was her husband. "Sweetie, come downstairs. There's a taxi waiting for you, it will take you where you need to go." Entering the restaurant, Nicole saw her husband rising from the table to greet her. He looked at her with admiration, and she felt surrounded by love and tenderness for him and everything around her. "Nicole, I apologize for my unworthy behavior yesterday." Carlos began as they started with dinner. "You must have had something important to celebrate, and I acted so poorly. I promise to do better. Tell me what happened, and we'll celebrate it tonight." "I got hired at your company," Nicole said happily. "True, I was hired as an external employee, but that means I can work from home." Carlos noticeably darkened and struggled to contain himself from scolding his wife. But he managed to compose himself just in time and even attempted a smile. "Well, I can't say I'm thrilled with your decision, but I'm happy for you, and I'll try to get used to the fact that my wife will now dedicate her time not only to me but also to work." Nicole, initially afraid, breathed a sigh of relief. She made an effort not to mention her work too much that evening to avoid irritating her husband. The evening went splendidly. Nicole felt like they were back in their honeymoon phase, and she was happy again. After their reconciliation, Carlos and Nicole's life went on as usual. Carlos, of course, didn't stop being late from work, but now he would call and warn Nicole each time. She didn't mind having dinner with him less frequently. It was even beneficial for her as she could focus more on her work. The more efficiently and quickly she completed her tasks, the more work she received from her employer. For each assignment, she received a payment, and Nicole was happy. She no longer worried about not having enough money to pay for the analysis. Finally, the necessary sum was accumulated. Nicole still had some money left, and she decided to arrange a romantic dinner for two. Perhaps this dinner would be the last for her and Carlos. She wanted to leave him with not so bad memories of her. "Carlos, I would like you not to be late from work today," she told her husband in the morning as he was getting ready for work. "What's up?" Carlos looked at his wife with a frown. "I have a little surprise for you," Nicole smiled, trying not to notice his displeasure. "All right, I'll try," Carlos replied. For this evening, he had planned to attend a party at one of his friends' places, and he had no intention of missing it. He decided that as usual, he would call Nicole and tell her that he had a lot of work to do and would have to stay late. Closing the door behind her husband, Nicole checked the refrigerator and realized that she was missing some ingredients for her plans. She needed to go to the store. Nicole immediately headed there. While walking through the market, she lingered a bit near the wine section. What's a romantic dinner without wine? Considering her condition, it was certainly undesirable, but one sip wouldn't hurt. She wasn't well versed in wines, so she took her time examining each bottle and reading the labels. As she was choosing wine, two young girls approached the aisle, giggling and talking loudly. "What will you wear to Larry's party?" one of them asked the other. "Something easy to take off," she replied. "Do you know who will be there?" Probably the usual crowd. The girls started listing names familiar to Nicole. Nicole felt uneasy. Of course, it could be a simple coincidence, but could all the names of her husband's new friends coincide? Nicole knew Larry. She had met him when she used to go to parties with Carlos. She didn't like Larry. He was too pushy and lecherous. "Don't panic prematurely," she reassured herself. "Even if it's not a coincidence, Carlos knows I'll be waiting, and he won't go to that party." The girls continued chatting and giggling, loaded several bottles of wine into their cart, and went to another section. After waiting for a while, Nicole decided to ask the store consultant for help. With their assistance, she quickly chose a wine and went to the checkout. In the evening, dressed in her most beautiful dress, Nicole sat in the living room, waiting for Carlos. He was already running late. Finally, the phone rang. Trying not to think negatively, Nicole picked up the receiver. "Yes, Carlos." Nicole, work piled up again, and I'll be coming home late. Don't wait for me, go to bed. We'll have dinner together some other time. He hung up before she could respond. At work. Staying late. Well, it happens. If it weren't for that overheard conversation at the market. Nicole paced around the apartment, lost in thought. Finally, she stopped in the middle of the room. A wild idea came to her mind to drive to Larry's place and make sure Carlos wasn't there. Or that he was. Before changing her mind, she called a taxi and, putting on her coat and shoes, rushed out of the apartment. In Larry's apartment, it was noisy and crowded. Everyone was already quite drunk. Nobody paid attention to Nicole. She walked through the living room, then into the kitchen, and one of the bedrooms. Carlos was nowhere to be found. About to leave, Nicole noticed another door further inside the apartment. Some sixth sense urged her towards it. Approaching, she pushed it, and the door opened. The room was engulfed in darkness. On autopilot, Nicole felt her way to the light switch and turned it on. In the middle of the room, there was a huge bed. On it, oblivious to the sudden burst of light, two people were making love. The girl was the same one from the supermarket, and her lover turned out to be Carlos. Nicole froze, unable to move. The couple eventually sensed that something had changed in the room and interrupted their passionate encounter, looking at the intruder who had dared to disturb them. Nicole? What are you doing here? Carlos yelled in surprise, snapping Nicole back to reality. She turned and rushed out of the room and then out of the apartment. She ran through the snow-covered streets, not feeling the cold. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Nicole only stopped when her lungs, affected by the cold and the fast run, refused to take in the air. After catching her breath, she hailed a taxi and gave her address. Arriving home, Nicole changed clothes, packed her belongings, and called for a taxi. As she left the house, she left her set of keys on the hallway table. She would no longer need them. To the airport, she said as she got into the taxi. I suppose you're back for good. Her mother showed no hint of surprise, seeing Nicole with a suitcase at the doorstep. Your room has become a little neglected. I haven't been going in there to avoid feeling sad. Nicole went to her room and sat on the bed. How fortunate she was to have such an understanding, kind, and loving mother. After unpacking her things and taking a shower, Nicole went to the living room. Her mother had already boiled the kettle and heated some pastries. Seeing Nicole's bewildered look, she explained, "The neighbor brought these for me this morning. She often pops in to help me out. Such a nice girl. Anyway, tell me, what happened? Why did you decide to come back?" Don't worry, I'm not against it. I'm just concerned for you. Mom, I'm pregnant, Nicole said softly. Well, that's wonderful, her mother replied. But I don't know who the child's father is, Nicole told her mother, recounting everything from the moment she met Derek and Carlos. Are you sure you'll find a clinic here that can perform such tests? Her mother asked thoughtfully. I think it doesn't matter now who the father is. I don't want anything to do with Carlos anymore. And Derek. I simply have no right to expect anything from him. So, we'll be living with you again, Mommy. If, of course, you don't mind. Don't worry, I'm paid well, and we won't be in need. Nicole assured her. Well, what are you thinking? How could you believe that I would be against it? Moreover, soon, I'll have a grandchild. It's such happiness. And we'll figure out the finances. I was promised an increase in my pension, her mother replied. Tears welled up in Nicole's eyes. Mommy, I love you so much. I'm so glad to have you, she exclaimed, rushing to hug her. After Nicole rushed out of the room upon seeing her husband's infidelity, Carlos got up from the bed, dressed, and left the room too. He had no intention of chasing after his wife. He just wanted to get drunk. He was sure Nicole would cry, sulk, and forgive him. After all, where could she go? Not to her mother's place. And what did she have? He was convinced that whatever she earned, she spent it all on frivolous things. Besides, how much did she make anyway? Carlos returned home in the early morning. Nicole was nowhere to be found. With a contemptuous snort, he collapsed onto the bed without even undressing and fell asleep immediately. Morning was not kind to Carlos. His head throbbed so badly that even his own breathing made him want to die. He wanted to call out to Nicole to get him some medicine, but then remembered she wasn't there. But wait. Maybe she had already returned? She had nowhere else to go. Nicole, he attempted to shout but grabbed his head immediately. It felt like scalding water had been poured on him. There was no response from his wife. He didn't dare to risk calling out again. Clutching his head, he managed to get off the bed and stumbled into the kitchen, where he believed there must be some medicine. To his surprise, he found it quickly. After taking 2 tablets, he sat on a stool, waiting for the pain to subside. The apartment was silent. Nicole was indeed gone. Soon, Carlos started to feel better. He brewed some coffee and pondered. In this city, Nicole had no one she could turn to, especially for several days. That meant she probably went back to her mother. Well then, he decided, let her cry to her mommy, stay with her for a while, and calm down. She'll come back anyway. She's probably used to the good life, no need to work, only for her own entertainment, and there's always money. Compared to how she used to live, she's incredibly lucky. What woman would give up such a life? So what if her husband cheats? She's the legal wife, and she's well provided for. She'll just have a tantrum and come back. And I'll take her back, all right. She is lovely, after all. Encouraged by these thoughts, Carlos took a shower, drank his coffee, and decided to head to Larry's to continue last night's party. In the hallway, he noticed some keys on the table. They were Nicole's keys. Oh, wow. So she left with serious intentions, he snickered. Well, dear, you did that for nothing. Now you won't come back without my knowledge. Carlos stepped outside. Nicole had been gone for almost a month now. At first, Carlos tried to be upbeat, thinking that she was purposely taking her time to make him miss her. He cursed Nicole bitterly and headed to yet another party where he drank heavily and slept with girls he couldn't even remember. In the morning, his indulgence in such revelry caused him to be late for work more often. A couple of times, he couldn't even make it and had to call in sick. His bosses didn't buy his excuses, and after the second incident warned him that they wouldn't tolerate any more slip-ups, and he would be fired if it happened again. He had to give up frequent partying. Now, after work, he would go straight home where, without alcohol, he felt lonely and unwanted. Nicole still hadn't called or asked to come back. After 5 weeks of her absence, Carlos finally decided to call her himself. However, her phone was disconnected. Overcoming himself, he made the decision to fly to Nicole. The departure was set for the weekend, on Saturday. On Friday morning, as Carlos was getting ready for work, the doorbell rang. Well, looks like I won't have to fly. She's come on her own. Carlos thought smugly and leisurely went to open the door. A courier stood there with a package in his hands. Sign here, he said indifferently, handing Carlos a receipt. Carlos signed, took the package from the courier, and returned to the apartment, opening it on the way. Inside was a notice stating that due to Carlos's failure to appear at the court hearing that took place 2 weeks ago, for which he had been notified, the court proceeded in his absence. As a result of the court's decision, he was no longer considered a married man. Copies of the documents were included. All day, Carlos racked his brain, trying to remember when he could have received the court summons that he had completely forgotten about. Nothing came to mind. When he returned home from work, he began searching. After tearing the entire apartment apart, he finally found the document in the hallway, behind the table. Apparently, when he took the envelope from the courier, he casually tossed it aside without even reading its contents. Hurriedly changing clothes, Carlos called a taxi and headed to the airport. He still couldn't believe that his meek and obedient wife had divorced him. Meanwhile, Nicole was at work, enjoying the tranquility of her new lifestyle. Each morning, she would take a walk by the sea, have breakfast, and then sit down to do translations. Her bosses had no objections to her being away, as long as she sent translated documents on time, which she diligently did. They paid her well, and Nicole even started saving for the future when the baby would be born. Her pregnancy was progressing smoothly, and she eagerly anticipated the day when she could hold her child in her arms. She already loved the baby and often talked to it, gently stroking her belly. In the evenings, Nicole and her mother would sit in the living room by the fireplace, drinking tea, doing crafts, and chatting. Thanks to Nicole's earnings and her mother's increased pension, they could afford better and more expensive medicines for her mother, which significantly improved her health. Sometimes, her mother would even accompany Nicole for a walk by the sea. One morning, Nicole was returning from her morning walk when she noticed a taxi pulling into their alley. By some sixth sense, she felt that it was for her. Nicole hurried inside and called her mother. "Mom, it seems we have some guests. And I have a feeling they are unwelcome. Let's not let anyone in." "Oh, Nicole, why do you think that way? Maybe it's not for us at all. And even if it is, what harm could they do to us? We haven't done anything to anyone or offended anyone," her mother reassured her. Nicole peeked out the window. The taxi had stopped in front of their gate, and Carlos stepped out. "Mom, it's Carlos. Don't let him in." Well. Indeed, not very welcome guests. "Don't worry, Nicole, I won't let him in." Knocking was heard at the door. "Who is it?" the woman asked sternly. "It's Carlos. Nicole's husband." "Nicole doesn't have a husband. So go away." "What do you mean she doesn't? Just because she decided to show some backbone and filed for divorce doesn't mean she's no longer my wife. She had no right to do that." "No, dear. She's not your wife anymore. It's confirmed by official documents. And she has just as many rights as you do. So, go away or I'll call the police." "Oh, you fools. When did you start talking back like that? You're nobody. If it weren't for me, your daughter would never have seen anything beyond this dump. Open the door, old hag. Or I'll break everything here right now," Carlos declared, proving his words by attempting to break down the door. It was the first time Nicole had encountered this side of her now ex-husband's character, but there was no time to be surprised. She grabbed her phone and called the police. The police arrived within minutes. They subdued the man, handcuffed him, and asked the women if they wanted to press charges. "If he never shows up here again and doesn't bother us, then we won't press charges," Nicole firmly replied. Then, turning to Carlos and looking him straight in the eyes, she said quietly, but emphasizing each word, "I want you to never appear in my life again." Carlos looked at his ex-wife with hatred and could not come to terms with the fact that some simple waitress had humiliated him like that. "Well, why are you silent?" one of the policemen lightly nudged him in the shoulder. "Fine, we're done here," Carlos reluctantly said, "I won't bother you anymore. You're not worth my attention. But mark my words, my ex-wife, your days at my company are numbered. I'll disgrace you there so much that no decent employer will ever want anything to do with you." He left with a scornful smile, heading for the exit. Throughout the way to the airport and on the plane, Carlos replayed the entire conversation in his head and couldn't figure out what he missed. Arriving home, he took a bottle of cognac from the cabinet, poured a glass, and settled on the couch in the living room. He began to drink, trying once again to recall the entire argument with Nicole and her mother, but he couldn't grasp anything. However, something bothered him. There he was, yelling, then the police showed up, and then Nicole appeared on the porch. "Stop. Nicole." Her figure. Or rather, her stomach. Not big, but still noticeable. "Is she pregnant?" Carlos poured himself a full glass of cognac and downed it in one go, not tasting its flavor or strength. He was about to rush to the phone, but then stopped himself. Carlos slowly poured himself another glass of alcohol and drank it, thinking. Well, Nicole, if you don't want to see me anymore, you won't. Let's see how you'll work and support the child without me. Or maybe I'll take the child away from you later, he murmured. During the rest of the weekend, Carlos devised plans for Nicole's moral destruction, encouraging himself with another glass of spirits. He got so carried away that he didn't even notice falling asleep. In his dream, he stood in the middle of a symphony orchestra that was slowly advancing towards him. Carlos pushed the musicians away, but they continued to approach, playing louder and louder, bringing their musical instruments closer to his ears. He futilely tried to break free, then woke up with a scream. He was relieved to realize that it was just a nightmare. But the music continued to play, and his head was pounding from it. Carlos searched for the source of the music. It was his phone. Someone persistently tried to call him. Cursing loudly, Carlos answered the call. Carlos, his boss's stern voice sobered him up instantly. Why don't I see you at work? I'm sorry, boss. I fell ill. I have a fever. I could barely get a hold of a doctor. I was about to call you, but you beat me to it, Carlos improvised on the spot, hoping his voice sounded convincing and sick enough. I didn't know it's so difficult to get a doctor these days. Probably because I've never been sick like this, the boss commented meaningfully. Well, get well, Carlos. And don't forget to provide a medical certificate after your illness is over. The boss hung up without saying goodbye. It was only now that Carlos bothered to check the time. It was almost 3 p.m. A groan escaped him. What should he do now? If he didn't provide a medical certificate, he would be fired immediately. Unable to come up with a better plan, he called Larry. Oh, come on. Don't worry. Larry cheerfully shouted into the phone. My sister is a doctor at a fancy clinic. If I ask her, she'll write any kind of medical certificate for you. Every boss will be impressed. Thanks, buddy, Carlos felt somewhat relieved. Come on over to my place. Let's celebrate your illness together. Larry yelled playfully and disconnected. Derek sat in the manager's office and listened to his phone conversation with Carlos. He couldn't believe that his friend had become so careless. Derek had returned to his hometown on Saturday and went straight to see his parents. In the evening on Sunday, he planned to visit his friend, but no one answered the door. Today, arriving at his old office, he also didn't find Carlos at his desk. Well, that's how things are, the boss said after the phone call. I have a feeling that your friend's only illness now is alcoholism. How can that be? Derek couldn't believe it. He just got married recently. He has such a wonderful wife. He has always been reckless and thoughtless, but you kept him in check. Maybe he didn't want to be worse than you, so he behaved. But now that you've left, his wife divorced him, most likely because of these partying habits. And his true nature has become evident to everyone. Nicole divorced him? Derek couldn't believe his ears. And where is she now? I can't say. However, I brought her to work here as a freelance translator, and I must say, she's doing a great job. I'm thinking of sponsoring her to study at a linguistic university on the company's expense. After she graduates, I could hire her as a full-time employee. What do you think? You're absolutely right. Nicole is a smart and hardworking girl. I think you won't regret it. I think so too. I rarely make mistakes about people. Just like I didn't make a mistake about you. Thanks to you and Nicole with her translations, our company is reaching new heights. We are currently finalizing a cooperation agreement with the Germans and opening our branch in Germany. And I want to appoint you as the head of that branch. Your German is pretty good, right? Not bad, Derek replied in astonishment, but I don't want to live in Germany. Don't worry. It won't be for long. You'll set up the branch, hire staff, get everything running smoothly, and then come back here to take my place. It'll take a year, maybe a year and a half at most. And what about you? Derek was now the least interested in where the boss would go, but he needed something to say to distract himself from the overwhelming flow of thoughts about Nicole and where she was. Nowhere. I'll only deal with global issues, sit on the board of directors. And you'll manage the whole company and occasionally report to the board or implement our ideas. So, pack your bags and go. Your tickets and hotel are already booked. The departure is tonight. Have a safe trip. The boss stood up and shook Derek's hand. He had no choice but to shake it and say,
Goodbye.
Derek left the office and dialed Carlos' number. He did it mechanically, not expecting to get an answer. But Carlos picked up. Judging by his voice, he was quite drunk, which didn't stop him from recognizing his friend. Derek. Hey. What brings you to call? Carlos said. I'm here in town. You're not at home or at work. Derek replied. I'm on sick leave, Carlos chuckled. Taking it easy. Come over, let's hang out together. I can't. I have to leave now. How are things with you? Derek decided not to mention that he knew about the divorce. With us. You probably mean that idiot Nicole? Well, I divorced her. Turned out to be a terrible wife and very ungrateful. Carlos said. Derek wanted to smash Carlos against the wall. Can you imagine? She doesn't like that I'm having fun. Carlos continued, unaware of the emotions he was stirring in Derek. So, I invited her to join me. Whose fault is it that she can't make friends? She's never seen how normal, modern youth have fun in her little hole. Of course, I'll find myself a better and more experienced girl, Carlos said. Derek felt disgusted. He turned off the phone so he wouldn't have to listen to what his probably former friend was saying about Nicole. Why did you bring me here? Carlos raged and threw things around in anger. What kind of venereologist? A very good one. Larry calmly sipped his whiskey. One of the best in town. Carlos had been on a sick leave for almost 2 months. He would have continued his sickness, but the money somehow quickly and quietly ran out, and he needed to survive somehow. At first, Carlos tried to stay with friends for at least a couple of days, but without financial contributions from him, they grew cold towards him and hesitated to invite him to their parties. Only Larry remained hospitable, unlike his father. The latter got tired of financing his wayward son's partying and abruptly limited his funding. Now Larry could barely afford to go to the club once a week. Carlos had to recover. Larry immediately called his sister and asked for a sick leave for his friend. I don't care about its authenticity. Why do I need a venereologist? I need a regular sick leave that confirms he was on sick leave. Larry exclaimed. But it does confirm that, see the signature and the stamp. What don't you like about it? And, by the way, where does it say that he was treated for some venereal disease? It just says a simple illness. Where's HIV mentioned here? His sister replied. And what else can a venereologist treat? A common cold? Larry grumbled. But there was nothing else to be done. Carlos returned to work, providing the purchased medical certificate. For a whole week, he was nervous, expecting ridicule. But everything remained the same. His colleagues behaved as usual. There were no smirks or whispers behind his back. Carlos calmed down. After the second workweek following his illness, he decided it was time to put his plan of moral destruction of Nicole into action. He called the boss's secretary and requested a meeting. To his surprise, the boss scheduled an appointment for the same day. Carlos considered it a good sign. Dear boss, I would like to tell you something, he began, entering the boss's office and sitting in the chair opposite. It concerns your freelance employee and, coincidentally, my ex-wife. And what about her? The boss raised an eyebrow in surprise. Yes. Since she was my wife, I couldn't tell you what she was doing while working for our company. Now, I deeply regret not telling you anything right away. But I think you'll understand. Carlos looked expectantly at the boss. Not receiving any immediate response, he took it as a sign to continue. So, she was translating our documents while simultaneously leaking information from them to our competitors. she comes from a poor family. When I met her, she was a simple waitress in an ordinary diner. I took her out of there, dressed her, provided everything she needed. But it was never enough for her. And suddenly, she was offered to spy. I did my best to dissuade her. Carlos pretended to show sorrow on his face, paused for a moment, and, oblivious to the boss's contemptuous smirk, continued, but only now do I realize that people in her circle have no sense of measure. Perhaps, having received what they wanted, they fear losing it again and try to grab as much as possible by any means. I apologize for not telling you all this earlier. Carlos fell silent, waiting to hear the boss's response. He was confident that the boss would immediately order Nicole's dismissal. The boss remained silent, looking at Carlos with a heavy and unfriendly expression. Well, you're such a scoundrel, Carlos, the boss began to speak quietly, each word piercing through the air. Carlos was so surprised that he even sat up in his chair. You are a person who is immersed in drunkenness, debauchery, and lies. You didn't hesitate to provide a fake sick leave. You didn't even hesitate that the sick leave was signed by a venereologist. By the way, I know this doctor. She works at the clinic owned by my mother-in-law. I could make just one call, and that mercenary doctor would be fired. But for now, I won't do it. No, I don't feel sorry for her, she is a good specialist and indeed a good doctor. Such a doctor should not lose her job because of a dissolute and unprincipled alcoholic like you. Tell her that this certificate was the last one. Once she issues another one like that, she will be fired immediately, despite her merits. Now, let's talk about you and your actions. You decided to mess with your ex-wife just because she didn't want to live with you. You decided to tarnish her good name because she didn't want to submit to such a nobody like you. Well, I'll tell you this, Carlos, you are fired. And I will use all my connections to ensure you won't be hired by any decent company. Now, get out. Carlos got up from his chair, still not fully comprehending what had just happened, and with a hunched back, he shuffled towards the door. Just as he reached the door, the boss's voice caught up with him, and dare to seek revenge on your ex-wife in any way, and I'll kill you. Ellen was born at the end of summer. She was a little, fair-haired angel with bottomless eyes. Nicole couldn't stop admiring her daughter. Finally, a new member arrived in our female kingdom, the new grandmother said, wiping tears of happiness from her eyes. Now we are not alone, my dear daughter. After the initial excitement and adjustment to the new daily routine, life in the girl's family settled into a new, unhurried flow. Ellen turned out to be an exceptionally calm child, she ate well, slept a lot, and only occasionally fussed when there was a genuine reason. Both her mother and grandmother adored the little girl. Nicole enrolled in the Linguistics University with the support of the company's management for a distance learning program. Of course, now she had less time for relaxation, but she enjoyed constantly being engaged in something. Her mother helped Nicole whenever possible, looking after the baby when she wasn't asleep, while Nicole took care of household chores or her studies. In the evenings, when their daughter went to sleep, Nicole would sit down to work. For Derek, 1.5 years stretched out longer than 2 years. The Germans were reluctant to let him go, they were afraid they wouldn't manage without such a competent leader. Finally, after the entire work process was streamlined and specialists were in place, Derek was ready to return to his homeland. First and foremost, upon arriving in his hometown, Derek headed straight to see his boss. I understand why you decided to visit me first, the boss said, rising to greet Derek and extending his hand as he chuckled. You probably didn't even bother taking your suitcase home, straight to work. Can't wait to go on vacation after 2.5 years of continuous work? 2 years and 3 months, Derek corrected with a smile. Hello, respected boss. I'm glad. I'm immensely glad to see you, the boss called out to the secretary at the door. Darling, make us some coffee, please. Come in, Derek, take a seat. While the secretary makes us coffee, let's celebrate your return a little. The boss took a bottle of cognac from the cabinet and 2 glasses. After pouring the drinks, he raised his glass, saying, Here's to the reunion. Here's to the reunion. Derek echoed. They took a sip. The secretary entered with the coffee and a plate of sweets. I won't keep you long. I know you're eager to visit your family, and a good rest wouldn't hurt either, the boss said, taking a sip of coffee, and Derek followed suit. So, I'm sending you on vacation until the end of the summer. Derek looked surprised. Yes. You haven't been away for 2 years, after all. So, take a proper rest. And on September 1st, like a schoolboy, return here to take my place. I'll hand over all the responsibilities, and you'll be the new leader of our company. Thank you for the vacation and for the trust. Derek stood up from the chair and bid farewell before leaving the office. At home, he took a shower, unpacked his suitcase, called his parents to let them know he had arrived, and that he would be with them in the evening. Then, after arranging the gifts brought from Germany for his parents, Derek left the apartment and went down to the garage. Initially, he wanted to go straight to the village, but he suddenly remembered Carlos and changed his plans. He felt the urge to visit his old friend. After their last conversation, they hadn't spoken at all, and Derek hadn't heard anything about him. When he arrived at Carlos' place, a stranger opened the door. I bought this apartment a year and a half ago, he replied to Derek's inquiries about Carlos. As for the previous owner's whereabouts, I have no idea. Derek decided to visit Carlos' parents. Oh, Derek. I thought you'd stay abroad forever. The man who opened the door struggled to recognize his friend. Before him stood a bearded man with overgrown, dirty hair, emitting a sharp odor of unwashed body and alcohol. Come in. I was just planning to sober up, Carlos said as he walked deeper into the apartment. Derek followed him. I was looking for you at your old address, Derek began to speak. I had to sell this apartment. Because of that idiot, my ex-wife, I got fired from work. I had nothing left to live on, so I moved back in with my parents. By the way, where are they? Derek couldn't believe Carlos' parents would allow him to live in such a condition. They moved to your parents' place too. They bought a house there. Nobody needs me anymore. She ruined my entire life. Carlos exclaimed. What did she do to ruin your life? Derek asked. I'm telling you, Carlos splashed some murky liquid from a dirty bottle into a glass. He gestured for Derek to join, but he declined, citing that he was driving. Carlos continued after taking a drink, I had to sell my car too, all because of that ungrateful idiot. I wanted to tell the bosses the whole truth about her, but they fired me like a dog. Carlos drank some more and then slumped on a chair, snoring. Derek silently left the apartment, closing the door behind him. He couldn't believe a word Carlos said. Nicole couldn't be the person Carlos portrayed her to be. In the evening, Derek sat in the garden with his parents. His father was grilling meat, and his mother was setting the table. Everything felt as if he hadn't been away for those long 2 years at all. How about we go to the seaside? Derek suggested to his parents. I have a vacation, almost 2 months. We can all enjoy some sunbathing. I'll cover all the expenses. That sounds like a plan, his mother cheerfully agreed. His father just turned around and showed a raised thumb. They already went. A girl of about 14 to 15 years old came out of the neighboring gate and headed in the opposite direction from Derek. Her words hit Derek like a bolt from the blue. All the way here, he dreamed of going to Nicole's house on the very first day and, meeting her, confessing his feelings. And then he would never let her go. They've left. Why? Where to? All his dreams and plans collapsed in an instant. Disheartened, Derek inserted the now unnecessary bouquet between the fence pickets and headed back to his hotel, where he was staying with his parents. Somebody has a secret admirer. Nicole, with her daughter and mother, was returning from the polyclinic. Today they had their regular checkup. Afterwards, they decided to stop at a cafe and treat themselves to ice cream. At home, they were surprised to find a bouquet left by someone. Laughing, the girls brought the bouquet inside, they didn't want to leave such beauty on the street. The vacation wasn't enjoyable for Derek. To not upset his parents, he pretended to be content and happily relaxed. But deep down, he wanted to return home and immerse himself in work. Still, you're a fool, Derek. The idea that came to mind caused Derek to call himself a few more unflattering words. Find her. Otherwise, you'll keep tormenting yourself and suffering like a damsel in distress waiting for a prince on a white horse. You already missed her once, now do everything to have her with you. He walked along the sea, getting further away from the crowded beach, but he didn't notice it. His thoughts were occupied with formulating a plan to find Nicole. All right, I need to go back to Nicole's house and ask the neighbors about her. Perhaps they know where Nicole and her mother went. I can ask the boss for her email address and write her a letter, requesting a meeting. Why didn't I think of this earlier instead of suffering about unrequited love? As if to confirm his thoughts about himself, a ball hit him on the head unexpectedly. Derek stopped in surprise. He looked around, there were hardly any people nearby. The ball. Sorry. A child's voice said from below. Derek looked down. Next to him stood a little blonde girl, looking up at him with huge bottomless eyes, filling with tears. Something vaguely familiar struck Derek when he looked into those eyes. He struggled to tear his gaze away from the child and looked around again. The ball, swaying on the waves, was slowly drifting away from the shore. Wait. Don't cry. We'll get your ball back. Wait. Don't cry. We'll catch your ball. Derek took off his t-shirt and shorts and stepped into the sea. He quickly caught the ball and triumphantly returned to the shore. The little angel smiled. Thank you. You're welcome. Derek didn't want to part with the little girl. Why are you alone? Where are your parents? The girl pointed in the opposite direction from the sea. All right, let's go, I'll walk you back. Derek decided to scold the girl's relatives for letting her wander alone. He took her hand and headed in the indicated direction. They hadn't walked more than a couple of meters when they saw someone running towards them. Ellen. Why did you leave me? I ran all over the beach looking for you. The woman rushed towards the child. Why weren't you watching the child? Derek began to lecture, but the woman lifted her head to look at him, and he saw Nicole's huge, bottomless eyes. That's why the girl with the ball seemed so familiar. Nicole? Derek couldn't believe his eyes. And without thinking, he quickly approached her and hugged her tightly. I'm so happy to see you. Derek. Nicole was just as surprised as he was. They told me that you left. Who? When? Your neighbor. She said it a couple of days ago. So those were your flowers? Nicole laughed. My mom and I were wondering who got an admirer. We were leaving that day. We had a doctor's appointment at the clinic. Ellen was getting vaccinated, and my mom had her monthly checkup. She was prescribed a new medication, and it's so much better than the previous ones. Thanks to it, my mom can visit the doctor on her own. That's great. And this wonderful little angel. This is my daughter, Ellen. She's obedient and doesn't stray far from me, but today we took the ball. I didn't think that balls have this special ability to run away. I was busy with work, completely confident that Ellen was playing nearby. Girls. How about we go for ice cream to celebrate the reunion? Derek didn't want to let go of Nicole or Ellen. Let's do it. We just need to get ready. I'll help. They spent the rest of the day together as a trio. Nicole explained why she left Carlos and how she had been living all this time. Derek talked about his work in Germany, but deep down, he wanted to talk about something else, their future together. He just didn't know how to begin. When he finally found a suitable moment, Nicole said, "It's time for us to go. It's getting late, and Ellen needs to go to bed." I'll walk you back, Derek decided to talk on the way. As they approached Nicole's house, Derek took her hand and looked her straight in the eyes. He said, Nicole, I'd like to talk to you about us. Okay, Nicole replied calmly, let's meet by the shore in a couple of hours. Since our last meeting, there hasn't been a single day when I haven't thought about you. I understand that I'm to blame for what happened. I shouldn't have let you go back then. Derek confessed. They sat on the sand as the sun slowly sank into the sea. Derek wanted to embrace Nicole and kiss her until she surrendered completely. However, he restrained himself, knowing that giving in to passion wouldn't let them resolve everything definitively. Derek needed to convince Nicole that he had serious intentions to make her happy. You're not to blame for anything. It was me who didn't understand what I was doing. Well, at that time, I thought I did. I believed my attraction to you wasn't serious, that you can't build a relationship solely on passion. I thought it would fade away, leaving emptiness. And I wanted stability and certainty for my future. You didn't show your intentions to me other than the same attraction I felt. I thought Carlos was more reliable and would provide that certainty. But I was wrong. So, should we give it a try and start a relationship? Derek asked. Derek, she turned to him and ran her hand through his hair, I'm a divorced woman with a little child. I cheated on my husband with his best friend just before our wedding. You deserve a better girl. I'm not for you. She turned her face back to the sea. Nicole, tell me honestly, is that the only thing holding you back from a relationship with me? Derek asked. I really like you. I'm attracted to you, but I can't. She hesitated. Listen, if we have mutual attraction, but you don't want a serious relationship with me, how about we have a resort romance? Derek brightened up with the idea that came to him. Are you suggesting that I become your mistress? Nicole didn't know how to react to such an offer, be offended or succumb to her feelings. Well, you don't want a serious relationship with me, right? But you're still attracted to me. So, why restrain ourselves? Perhaps if we don't hold back, our attraction will fade away? Derek suggested. Something about this approach reminds me of Carlos. Exactly. Except now, you'll play the role of Carlos. Nicole looked at Derek with skepticism and didn't know what to say. On one hand, the offer sounded tempting, she could be with Derek, but on the other. Nicole, Derek embraced her and pulled her close, don't overthink it. I promise to behave extremely respectfully, and I'll do everything to make you change your mind about me. Okay, I agree. Let's start the romance. But right now, I have to go home, she said. I'll walk you home. They walked hand in hand to Nicole's house. So, see you tomorrow? Derek asked hopefully as he kissed Nicole. When can I see you? We usually go for a walk by the sea with Ellen in the morning. If you want, you can join us. They started seeing each other every day, going on walks, sunbathing, and playing with Ellen. The enamored couple only parted in the evening. Nicole would go home to put her daughter to bed and then return to Derek. He rented a small house close to Nicole's place where they spent their nights together. In the morning, Nicole would hurry back home to be there when Ellen woke up. Nicole, what's going on with Derek? Her mother asked with increasing concern each day. She was worried that her daughter had fallen for someone who might be using her. I don't know. I think I'm in love. And what about him? He wants to be with me, but I'm afraid it's just passion that will fade away soon, and we'll end up as strangers to each other. Nonsense. You two spend so much time together, even with the child. Simple passion should have faded away a long time ago. And if you still feel drawn to this man, it means it's much more serious than that. Are you so sure? Of course. I think he loves you. Nicole blushed, feeling that way herself sometimes, but she pushed those thoughts away. Ellen's birthday was approaching, and Nicole started preparing actively. The caring mother ordered a cake, bought various decorations, and invited guests, including Derek's parents. On that day, after their night together, Derek joined Nicole to help her prepare for the celebration. They set up tables and chairs in the garden, cleaned vegetables and fruits for salads, and took care of Ellen while her mother was preparing treats. Shortly before the guests arrived, Derek excused himself, claiming he needed to change clothes. Nicole, along with her daughter and mother, also planned to get dressed up, so they didn't mind his departure. The guests enjoyed themselves and played with the birthday girl. The little one was gleefully laughing. Nicole and Derek stood apart from the lively group, watching with smiles on their faces. "Will you marry me?" Derek unexpectedly whispered into Nicole's ear. She stared at him in surprise. Then he pulled a ring from his pocket, took her hand, and slid it onto her finger. "Enough already. Don't you see that we are great together? I love you and Ellen. Be my wife." Suddenly, Nicole realized how tense she had been all this time. She was afraid he would leave and forget about her like any regular resort fling. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I agree." Derek lifted her in his arms and twirled her around while showering her with kisses. Then he put her down, took her hand, and led her to the rest of the guests. "Attention, everyone," he called out. "I have fantastic news for you. Nicole has just agreed to become my wife." Everyone cheered joyfully, applauding and offering their congratulations to the newly engaged couple. A little later, Derek's mother approached him and led him aside, asking quietly, "I hope you propose to Nicole not just because Ellen is your daughter? In the sense that she's my daughter?" Derek looked puzzled. "I'm more concerned about when you managed to have a child. Judging by the girl's age, you slept with your best friend's girlfriend. And she didn't tell you she was pregnant with your child?" "I didn't know who the child's father was," Nicole heard from a distance, noticing Derek's changing expression as he spoke with his mother. Without hesitation, she walked up to them and caught the end of the conversation. "And I still don't know. And why do you assume Ellen is Derek's daughter?" Well, parents," mocked the mother-in-law. "Poor child. And didn't you notice that your daughter doesn't have any of her father's features in her face? She simply takes after me," Nicole replied. "Oh, yes," the mother-in-law continued with sarcasm, "when Ellen smiles, she looks so much like Derek." She then pulled a small black and white photograph from her purse. Ellen stared at the photo. "It can't be," exclaimed Nicole. "Where did you get this photo?" "This is a picture of Derek at the same age as Ellen is now. I always carry it with me. Anyway, sort things out here, so-called parents." The woman turned towards the other guests, but she stopped and turned back. "By the way, when I was changing Ellen, I noticed she has the same birthmark on her back as Derek. It's something we pass on in our family. You, Nicole, should check it sometime when you have the opportunity." Nicole and Derek stood, looking at each other. "I hope our daughter will be smarter than us," Derek finally said. Nicole nodded and approached him, wrapping her arms around him. Within a minute, they were both laughing like crazy. The couple celebrated a modest wedding right there in Nicole's house with the same group of people. The remaining days of Derek's vacation were devoted to packing up. There was a real frenzy of gathering all their belongings. It was decided that Nicole's mother would also move and live with the newlyweds. Meanwhile, Derek and Ellen were searching for an apartment. Their current apartment was suddenly too small for the growing family. The day before Nicole and Derek were to leave, after putting their daughter to bed, they took a walk to the sea. They strolled slowly, wrapped in each other's arms, in silence. No words were needed. Both of them felt as if they had always been together and had never parted. As if to confirm these feelings, Nicole looked at her husband and asked, "We'll never be apart again, right?" "Never. I won't make that mistake again, won't lose the woman destined for me. I love you. I love you too."
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in new releases.